Man, I'm extremely excited to talk to you. I've followed your career a little bit. I've seen you over the years, but what really opened my eyes to you in the program, there was a special when you guys were playing in New York last year at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
And, it went deeper than just the on the court and deeper than just the basketball accomplishments. And, those are the type of things that I like to see. I like to see the behind the scenes, and especially for the journey of somebody that looks like me in this industry.
No doubt.
I think that, a lot of times that's why I talk about representation and how much it matters for not only myself, but, for other Black males that are in the industry, and seeing, guys like yourself reach the highest level in some of the highest conferences is definitely inspiring. So, it's a humbling experience being on the other end of this call here and having an opportunity to chat with you a little bit and share your journey.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, man. I just hope to be a vessel, somebody that can use my experience and perspective, things that I've learned, things that my failures even, to help other people, find their way to navigate through this life and this profession.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess the place I want to start, who is Mike Boynton? Like beyond the basketball, beyond, the wiki links and the profile on the website, who is he? Talk to me a little bit about that.
I'm just a regular guy, to be honest. I mean, I'm a son first and foremost. I'm a man of God. Try to live my life that way, in a way that's pleasing to my Lord and Savior. Try to be a committed and loyal husband to my wife, a father who's loving but also challenging to my children. Try to be a good brother. I got 4 sisters. Try to be a respectful brother. Obviously, I wear a lot of hats as a coach. Try to be a mentor. Try to be somebody that my assistants can look up to and respect who they work for. And at the end of the day, I think it's just about trying to be a good person. Somebody who when I sleep at night, I have no regrets, and I don't feel conflicted because I haven't treated people the right way. I don't sleep a lot, but I sleep peacefully because I feel like I try to live the right way, and I have very few regrets about anything that happens. There are disappointments, but not very many regrets.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I literally was just talking about that earlier this morning. I was talking about the disappointments and, us having to, A, take the lesson that it was intended for us to learn from it, but then B, release that. Once we've learned that lesson, release it, forgive ourselves for the role we played in it, and move forward towards, the next step, the greater good that, some of those things fall apart to open the doors for something better to come together. And like you said, I mean, you can have disappointments, you can have things that maybe you would do differently, but, utilizing them in a positive way versus having regrets and allowing them to torment you. So that's great to hear. I think that, a lot of us, you mentioned the failures or the disappointments. And I think a lot of times we try and hide from that, right? Or we try and, especially in this era of social media, this era of, I call it the filtered lens, right? Like everything, people see all the positive, they see all the beautiful things because that's what we're sharing. So for you to say that, it's very introspective, and it tells that, you do some of that deep thinking. How would you say, growing up in Brooklyn, in the 90s, and, I'm from Detroit, and we all know, whether it be Brooklyn, whether it be Chicago, whether it be Detroit, the 90s was a little bit of a different era for Black men coming up, and the expectations and the glass ceilings and, trying to dream beyond your surroundings. Obviously, you've been extremely successful, and you've made it, a long ways from growing up in an area where, for us, a lot of times, you don't see that level of expectation. There's a lot of, hey, they look at some Black men and they say, well, you're either gonna be dead or in jail by the time you hit 18, right? So
Sure.
Talk to me about how that has the influence that coming up in Brooklyn at that time has had on your career and on your life.
It's it's probably invaluable in many ways, how I grew up, what I grew up around, who I was able to have access to in terms of my parents, first and foremost, right? So obviously, I didn't have any brothers growing up. Um, my mom was pregnant, and when I was 5 years old, gave birth to a boy who would have been my little brother. He never came home from the hospital. He died essentially at birth with some respiratory issues. And so I think in many ways, as I reflect back on it now, like that was a vital moment in my life. First of all, I learned the value of people, right? And the most valuable person or people in my life early on, my parents. I grew up in Brooklyn, as you said, and I was one of probably two guys that I knew who actually had their father in their house. And, you know, this isn't a bash on Black men. It's just that unfortunately, there's a lot of circumstances in which the Black males don't grow up with their father at home. Not that they're not present or that they're not, you know, willing to be a father to them, but having access to my dad every day was immeasurable for me. And in fact, I know now the value of being at home for my own son. Yeah. And not because of just my experience, but also what I saw from instances where that wasn't the case, right? And guys had a hard time understanding how to show affection to women, how to be respectful of authority, how to understand that you have a responsibility as a man beyond what your own desires are. And so that was probably the biggest key. Is I grew up with my dad in the house, but my mom also laid out expectations from an academic standpoint that basketball was never going to mean more than education. Neither one of my parents are college graduates. Neither one of them attended college, in fact, but they understood the value that I would be able to create for myself through education, through educational opportunities. And so growing up there, I saw, drugs and gun violence and gang violence. But in many ways, I was shielded from that because of my parents, but also several other people in my community who looked after me and saw that once I started to matriculate to basketball and I was going to be able to have some success, they wanted to help me escape and not be one of those unnecessary statistics of being dead or in jail before age of 25, so to speak. And so that environment also created an atmosphere of competition for me. Basketball was a big deal growing up, and I was able to compete against some of the best basketball players in the country just in New York City. And that gave me a level of a competitive mindset that I think I still carry with me to this day. But going back to those roots, that was the foundation that I had. And it's still the foundation that I lean on when tough times come up, when I have to make a decision between what's right or what's easy, because they're not oftentimes the same, right? And many times there's a conflicting interest between doing what's easy or more comfortable and doing something that's a little bit more challenging, but is the right thing to do. Staying away from, in my instance, right, embarrassing my university. I could very easily put myself in a situation where I could do something that would be embarrassing to Oklahoma State. That's not cool, right? That's not going to be reflective of me or my family. Something I want my kids to see or have to go through with my family. So I'm always conscious of the decisions I make, and a lot of that started by being put in the right position when I was younger.
For sure. And you touched on the role that the upbringings played in your role where you're at now, and it's played on your life. When did you know that coaching was your calling and was that next step for you? I mean, you had a great career, playing at South Carolina. One of the best shooters that stepped on campus there. What made you say, hey, this is the path I want to go, versus whether trying to iron it out overseas or whatever the case may be? When did you know you were meant to be a coach?
I'll be honest, I didn't know, and that's awfully nice of you. I was just an okay player. I played really hard. I love to compete. I love to win, but I wasn't a super highly talented kid. But I did, for the most part, take advantage of the opportunities that were in front of me. But I'll be honest, I thought that I was going to be a professional basketball player for a long time and hoped to even beyond college. at least go overseas and play for a few years and experience that life. And it just wasn't in the cards for me. And so I'm sitting after my senior year in college. I'm in New York City. It's August, and I come to this realization that I'm not going to play. And I played for two really good coaches. Eddie Fogler recruited me to South Carolina. I played for him for 1 year, and then I played 3 years for Dave Odom. And both of them in August of 2004 suggested that I try to look into coaching. And I thought both of them were crazy at the time because I was 22 years old and I'm not going to coach. I mean, I want to play, right? But those guys planted a seed in me and really challenged me to give it a shot. And so I was afforded an opportunity to go to Furman as a graduate assistant. And that really changed my perspective because I started gaining appreciation for what coaches really do. I understood the impact because I knew the impact that the coaches that I played for had on my life. But I didn't know what coaches did, actually, until you start doing the job. And it's been the best decision from a professional standpoint that I think I could have ever made.
And you talked about the impact that those coaches had on your life and understanding the importance of the type of impact that a coach can have on the life of a young man, especially a Black coach can have on the impact of a young Black man, right? And especially you talked about the statistics, right? And we can run from or hide from all we want, but there's a lot of situations where you're coaching, young men that have not had that father figure in the home on an everyday basis. And a lot of times they say, well, that's needed at the important years, the foundational years growing up. But as we know, as men, a lot of our growth and maturation happens, in that 17 to 21, 22 time frame. So, you being in a role where, you on a lot of occasions are one of the most important, if not the most important figure in this young man's life. So obviously coaching plays a huge part on that, but talk to me a little bit about, just the on the court side or the personal development that happened at South Carolina that prepared you for, your next couple phases in life.
Yeah, so my experience in South Carolina was a really, really good one. It was because it challenged me, right? And it made me rethink a lot of things about myself. So obviously I was away from home for the first time and trying to navigate this new world, trying to figure out if what I did in high school was good enough anymore, and it wasn't. And it took a while for me to accept that. And once you accept it, you have a chance. But as long as you fight it, you got no shot. And so I tell young guys all the time, you have to embrace the opportunity and you have to seek the challenge. You can't run from it, right? Because it's not going away. Things don't just disappear. That's not reality. So we can deal in how we hope things are or wish things would be, or we can deal in reality and look at ourselves in the mirror and say, what I'm doing isn't good enough, and seek out the help that's going to get us to where we need to go, whether that be strength and conditioning, which it was for me. I had never lifted a weight before I got to college and didn't understand why I needed to then either. I had success playing basketball without lifting weights before. What do I need to lift weights for? I'm not a weightlifter. I'm a basketball player. And as long as that mentality was there, my growth was going to stagnate. I had to embrace that, it's something new, something different, something challenging. My body didn't respond to it great. It affected my ability to play the game as comfortably as I wanted. But once I got over how it made me feel and brought into what it could help me do, that's when I started to turn the corner. And so, just my experience in South Carolina was great because I came in as a really immature 18-year-old, and I left as somebody who had a lot of confidence that they can go out and accomplish whatever they wanted.
For sure. And you spoke a little bit on your coaches that were there and how they kind of influenced and motivated you to take a coaching path. Once you got into coaching, who are some of those mentors that helped to guide and navigate you through the process? Some guys that you leaned on then and maybe you still lean on. You talked earlier about being a mentor and wearing that sort of hat now currently. Who are some of those guys that kind of pulled you along and helped you to find your way?
Yeah, I always have to go back to my foundation, my high school coach, Bob Leckie was a tremendous influence. Um, but he wasn't the first coach to ever coach me. The first coach to ever coach me is a guy named Kenny Pretlow. He found me at a kind of an after school program when I was about 7 years old. I was kind of tall at the time, and so I remember him like it was yesterday. I was just kind of sitting on the sideline. And he said, "Hey, how old are you?" And I told him, he's like, "Man, you're pretty tall. You think your mom would let you play?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Well, if you don't mind, let's call her and ask her." And my mom said, "Okay," and that was the start of it. And I still have a tremendous relationship with Kenny Pretlow to this day. But other guys, once I got into coaching, other than him, have been my college coaches, both Coach Odom and Coach Fogler, the guys that I've worked for. And that's been one of the best parts of my journey, is that I've had an opportunity to work for different guys. And because of that, I've been, I understand now you can have success in different ways, right? You can do things, you can have an aggressive mentality. You can be a pressing coach. You can be a run and gun coach. You can be a zone coach. You can have success doing things a lot of different ways. And so my experience working for Larry Davis, Buzz Peterson, Mike Young, Darren Horn, Frank Martin, Brad Underwood have all helped me grow. But the guys that really are mentors that I lean on today would probably be Coach Fogler, Coach Odom, my high school coaches, and George Raveling, who I've known since I was about 14 years old, and really has always kind of treated me like a surrogate son, somebody he wanted to see have success. He believed in my dreams and have always tried to guide me to not back down from them.
For sure, for sure. And that's something that I hear over and over again about George, from Kevin Sutton. We talked earlier this week, and he said the exact same thing. We spoke, and he couldn't say enough great things about him, and about the influence that he had on his life. I had a conversation earlier this week with Dennis Gates. Dennis said the exact same thing. So, it's vitally, it's very obvious and apparent that, he's had a strong impact on, some of the nation's best coaches, and some of our, our culture's best men or best representations within the basketball space. So that's awesome to hear, and exciting to hear. And I'll touch on that in a little bit, but one of the things, coming into Oklahoma State, and coming into, a powerhouse within the Big 12, previously the Big 8, with a long line of successful coaches, right? Leonard Hamilton, he's like that, the benchmark, or, he's on the current Mount Rushmore. Eddie Sutton, Travis Ford, you mentioned Brad Underwood. Talk to me a little bit about that, the mission of coming in and following such, great men and great coaches, and sustaining kind of that winning, championship culture there in Stillwater along the way.
Well, for me, what I got to understand is, there's standards here, and it's my job to not allow those standards to be lowered, to ultimately raise them, and to set up this program to be in a better position whenever it is that I leave than it was when I got here. And if that's 40 years from now in retirement, so be it. If something critically bad were to happen to me tomorrow, I hope that the program's in better shape than the day I took over as head coach. And I think we're doing that. I think in my mind, that's the ultimate goal. Along with, and these things aren't counter to each other, raise the standard for the program, but to have a impact on the lives of every young man that I have a chance to coach, so that parents can know, there's one thing I know about Coach Boynton is I can trust him. My son is going to be cared for. He's going to be challenged to be his best. He's not going to be allowed to cut corners, and he's going to leave that program a better person because he was around that coach. And so that's how I think about it. Obviously, I understand the importance of winning basketball games. I want to win. I told you about my competitive nature, and the way that was kind of instilled in me from a really early age. But winning isn't about just games for me. Winning is about changing lives and impacting people and making sure that kids, especially the young Black males who need so much support and guidance at a time where they're so confused right now about what their value is to this world and to our country sometimes, to make sure that they understand that there is a place for them here, that they don't have to settle for anything less than anybody else, that they can be anything that anybody else could be, that they could be the CEO of a bank. They don't have to be a basketball player. We got to change that mindset. They don't have to be an entertainer. They can be an engineer. They can be a doctor. They can be an attorney. And we got to continue to make sure we open their minds to understand that success doesn't just come from bouncing the ball. But bouncing the ball gives you access.
Yep.
Just like it's given me to opportunity in education, opportunity for financial literacy, opportunity to escape poverty, opportunity to put myself in a position where my children's lives are going to be better than mine was growing up.
For sure. And I think that, that I love everything you just said, because I'm constantly, when I'm talking to young men and mentoring and talking through the recruiting process, I'm speaking later on today during the Black College Expo on the recruiting process. I always talk about utilizing whatever sport it is that you play as an avenue or as a vehicle to achieve those things beyond, because eventually the air is coming out of the ball, right? It's going to stop bouncing at some point. That's inevitable. I don't care who you are, how good you are. At some point, that ball is going to stop bouncing. And, utilizing the journey to advance yourself much further than you were prior or you could have been without it. So that's amazing to hear that that's part of your.
The truth is, just the ball's going to stop bouncing much sooner than many of them are willing to even consider.
Oh, yeah.
Right? For instance, for me, right, by the time I got to college when I was 18 years old, and I started playing when I was about 5. So I had played for 13 years. There was only 4 years left of basketball for me. I didn't play a meaningful day of basketball after I played my last college basketball game. But to tell myself at 18 that I had played more basketball up to that point than I would have been, I would look at my coaches like, you're crazy. I'm going to play for the rest of my life.
Yep.
Well, the reality is now I get to share that experience. No, you're not, right? If you play 4 years of college, say even if you play one, a long career is 8 to 10 years. That's it. That's a really good long career wherever you're playing at, in NBA or otherwise. And so we got to start thinking about the next steps. What's next? How are we going to take this game and transition it to the next phase of my life?
Talk to me a little bit about that uncomfortable conversation, and how do you even broach that subject with guys that, like you said, I mean, are in the same role that you've experienced, so you understand, you can empathize where their mindsets are, but you're introducing a concept to a lot of them as foreign or something they haven't even thought about or don't want to think about. How do you have that conversation and prepare them for that moment? And then also start to set them up to change their get them to conceptualize the future beyond basketball.
Again, just like you said earlier, man, the numbers are the numbers, right? There are only 450 jobs in the NBA. Everybody can't go there.
Yeah.
So let's just talk in reality. Let's not talk about this pipe dream world that we want to exist. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Without telling them that they can't achieve their dreams. You can.
Yeah.
You just have to understand that's a really narrow dream that you're shooting for. So sure, go for it. That means I should never go 2 or 3 days without knowing that you were in the gym. If that's what you're saying you're trying to do, you can't. Those things are counter to each other. I'm not going to dedicate myself to the game, but I'm going to play in the NBA. Not going to happen. Even if you dedicate yourself to the game, you still may not make it because there's a limited amount of space there for people. And so what is reality? The reality is you're going to have to do something at some point that doesn't involve playing a sport sooner than later. So let's start thinking about the more you compare, the more you can prepare your mind to do something, the better opportunity you have to actually make it happen. So if you can start thinking about what you want to do after basketball, then you can start to prepare yourself for how do you do it. Yep. If I want to be an attorney, if I want to own a bank, now I can start doing research. We got to give ourselves access to information. And so the conversation isn't uncomfortable for me. It's uncomfortable for the player who all he wants to hear is how great he is as a basketball player and how he can dedicate himself, and all he has to ever think about is, making a jump shot. Well,
Yeah.
not true. Let's talk in reality. Let's talk about this. This dream is great. Here's what it's going to take for you to get there. If you're not doing those things, no shot. So now that's also going to be very short-lived. If you make it, you're going to play 5 years, and that's great. It's good. You're probably going to make good money. What are you going to do when you're 30 years old and basketball's over? Because by the time you're 30, for the most part, basketball is over. There are very few 30-plus-year-old guys playing the game. There just are.
Very few.
It's a young man's game. The game in the NBA, from an NBA standpoint, is getting younger. And so just being willing to tell the kids the truth, I think that's what it's about. It shouldn't be uncomfortable to tell the truth. It may not be fun. You may not like what you hear, but you should always want the truth.
Yeah, and you touched on it. It shouldn't be uncomfortable, but I think the hardest part about it is, especially in the world, in the industry we live in, when you're the minority telling somebody the truth, when there's so many people that are, living and creating and making a living off of, selling that kid. And it's not, I wouldn't even call it necessarily selling them a dream, because they don't have to sell hard, right? They're already in the market for it. They're out shopping for it. They're just pointing them in the direction. Okay, this is the dream you want. I got it right here. So when you talk about those real life conversations and preparing those guys for life after the game, and you look at you guys have had major success in recruiting, major success. You had a couple top players in the last couple of years. Coming up this year, the number 2 player in the country, number 1 college guy, Cade Cunningham, and I absolutely loved watching him play. Watching him play on the circuit over the years, and then Rondell Walker, who's also amazing kid coming up on the circuit. Talk to me about building a program that is not only one that top prospects look at and will consider, but building those type of relationships and the type of transparency within who you are and how you're going to prepare them for success to be able to land some of those top guys.
What I say and what I tell my staff is, let's embrace doing the hard work every day. Let's make sure we invest in relationships. Let's make sure we don't try to cut corners. To me, the rankings are separate aside from anything we do. They have really no tangible value to me.
Right.
It's good for people to talk about, right? We respect it because we respect that those people who are doing it are trying their best.
Yeah.
I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. But at the end of the day, it's about fit. You got to find guys who fit what you believe is the way a program should be run. Does this kid want to be coached? Or does he want to be coddled to? We don't coddle. So a kid who wants to be coddled, that's more talented, doesn't have as much value at Oklahoma State than a less talented kid who wants to be coached and challenged. That kid's got a chance because what we know we're going to do when they get here is push them. And if they're, talk about it, we try to measure care factor. Like, we want guys with a high care factor, right? Do they really care, about themselves, to be honest? Do they care about their families, that they're not going to do anything to embarrass their families? Do they care enough about the opportunity that they're going to take it seriously and appreciate it? And if they do that, they got a shot. A kid who's more talented but has a low care factor, doesn't respect people's time, so is going to show up late, going to give attitude to coaches because he thinks he knows it all. Those kids aren't going to have success here. So it doesn't matter what he's ranked. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. And so having those conversations, and I'll feel free to let you talk to any of my guys. We have real conversations in recruiting. This is not a pipe dream. We don't sell those here. They're not available in Stillwater. Here's what's available. You got a coach that's going to be with you every day.
I love it.
You're going to have hard conversations, and in practice, if you don't bring it, you're going to hear about it, whether you're Cade or you're a walk-on. You couldn't tell the difference if you walked in my practice who the best player was or who wasn't on scholarship based on how I coach them. For
sure. And I think that's vitally important. I think you touched on something that, I always adopt something, from every interview, every person I talk to, I go into these and I'm looking to learn more about that coach, or looking to learn more about that person. And I always, learn something that I can impact or I can impart and put into my life. And utilize for the student athletes that I touch and engage with. And you saying that the care factor, that's huge, right? Understanding, not only how much do you love the game, right? Because, that's something that is cliche. Everybody talks about how much they love the game and how much they want it, right? But, the care factor, I think that's huge. And I think that being able to identify how much somebody cares about it and how much somebody cares about, whatever they're doing in any walk of life. And it reminds me of, my grandmother used to say to us, I don't care if you're I don't care if you're a janitor, right? But you better be the best janitor that's ever mopped that floor. So, just having that care factor about yourself opens the door for success in life. So that's something huge that I'm definitely going to carry with me moving forward.
Absolutely.
All right. So one of the things that, I think that is vitally important in, in the journey of, Black coaches and in the journey of up and coming Black coaches is understanding the past, understanding those that paved the way and walked in front of us. And, you alluded to it earlier. You talked about the relationship that you and George Raveling have had. What would you say the importance of seeing legacies and knowing people like George and, seeing the legacy of a, John Thompson Jr. or John Chaney, Tubby Smith, Nolan Richardson, Clarence Gaines, Wade Houston, and many, many others. What has the value and the importance of their legacies been in relation to your coaching journey and the future advancement of Black men in our industry?
Yeah, I mean, there are, I think, 95 current Black head coaches in the country right now. Again, part of my responsibility is to make sure that what I do here opens more doors and not closes them, right? In the same way that when there were just 4 or 5 Black coaches, they went out on a limb to fight for me. They didn't know it was me, but they were fighting for me. The late, great Coach John Thompson. I remember growing up, my dad was a Georgetown fan. And, there's no doubt in my mind, he just wanted to see, the Black coach have success with the all-Black team. And there's nothing to be apologetic about for saying that. Like, that's okay to want to see your people succeed doing something that you don't see them normally do. And that's what the case was at the time. And so I always admired that. I always appreciated Coach Nolan Richardson and what he did with Arkansas. I wasn't a fan of any of those teams.
Yeah.
As like, I love Arkansas basketball. No. But when Arkansas played, I wanted them to win. I wanted them to beat UCLA. I was huge on Scotty Thurman making that shot from 3 to win that championship in '95. That was big time, And so, and watching Kevin Ollie win a national championship with UConn in 2014, I think it was, source of pride to see brothers have that level of success, because we have to see it more, right? So that coaches like myself, coaches like you, coaches who we don't know yet, right, that are coming up, just like I was when John Thompson was doing it, can aspire to something. It's hard to try to do something that you can't see. It's why, right? And it's kind of a flawed mentality in some ways, but it's why a lot of our young Black men aspire to be athletes and entertainers. That's what they see as success. They don't have exposure to a bunch of successful Black attorneys or Black bank owners or Black engineers. They don't know that a Black man made the stoplight. Like, they don't have access to that information. So they aspire to be things that they see. So to your question, I have unbelievable reverence for Coach Chaney. I was fortunate. I played against one of his last teams. My senior year in college, we played at Temple. I had a graduation that day. Now, I'm a first-generation college graduate, right? I realized at the beginning of the fall semester, because I graduated in December, that graduation was going to fall on the day that we were playing Temple, right? And I knew I had to be at graduation because my family wasn't going to not let me walk. Again, it's a symbol. It's raising the bar. Yeah. So now my kids, they're going to college. You know what I mean? All the kids after me, that's the level now. So I went to my coach and said, Coach, I have to walk in graduation. We have a game that day. I also wanted to play against Coach Chaney's team. It was equally important to me to be able to walk through a handshake line and shake his hand and say thank you. Now, they beat us. Graduation was fun. Early in the day, we went and lost to Temple. It was our first loss of the year. But I got so much respect for those guys because of the sacrifices they made so that a guy like myself can be here. So part of my responsibility is, what does Mike Boynton do every day to make sure that somebody else gets a chance to sit in his seat? And what should he not do so that someone doesn't have an opportunity to sit in his seat? So don't go out and get a DUI. Don't be the guy on the front page so that they don't look at the next guy sitting in that room saying, man, I remember last time we gave this guy at Oklahoma State an opportunity, he embarrassed us.
Absolutely.
I think about that every day.
So there's a huge level of personal accountability and ownership of, understanding the weight that you carry and the responsibility that you carry being in that seat. What would you say are some of the things that you believe can be done by others, maybe not even necessarily within the head coaching realm, but just others in general to help create more opportunities in the future? For example, obviously you talked about the exposure to success, exposure to those black head coaches, but for young kids growing up to understand and see that there's potential and possibilities, how can we give them, whether it be more coaching education, whether it be more, whatever the case may be, what are some things that we can do to create more opportunities in the future?
Well, the first thing is that, number 95 I talked about. We need every one of them to have as much success as possible. We need all of the brothers to win because that's going to be the fastest way to more opportunities, is for the guys that are currently in those opportunities to have success, right? And I say this all the time. Coach Smart, Shaka Smart, is in my conference. We're in many ways competitors. We both recruit the state of Texas pretty heavily, right? Because that's kind of a really heavy area for me outside of state of Oklahoma. But unless we're playing each other, I want that dude to win every game.
Yeah.
Now, I want to beat him when we play against each other, but I want him to win all the games except for those 2 a year, all of them. And unless we're recruiting against each other for a kid, I want him to get it. Want him to get him.
Yeah.
Now, if we're going after the same kid, I want to get the kid.
No doubt.
Right? And I think that's the mentality. We have to compete against each other and cheer for each other's success at the same time.
Absolutely.
Him winning is me winning.
Absolutely.
Him losing is me losing. It's not him winning is me losing. Absolutely not. So we have to change that mentality. And the other thing is, we have to make sure that our younger coaches coming up understand what success looks like in the business, not what recruiting looks like. Recruiting is a vital part of having success. But if it's the only thing you understand about the profession, you got no shot long term. Yep. There's so much more to it. If you don't know how to teach the game, if you don't know how to prepare a scouting report, if you don't understand how to comport yourself in the media, whatever it is, those things are critically important.
Well, you touched on something that I think is a pain point for a lot of young black men that are in the assistant role, being viewed or being pigeonholed as just recruiters. And they're navigating through, the external, internal battles that a lot of us never see, especially if you've never been in that role. And obviously you've experienced that and you've seen it. But I think the biggest question and the biggest conversation I've had with guys in that assistant coaching role is that challenging balancing act of, pursuing career growth and development while not appearing to be self-promoting or, pandering towards that next job. What advice would you give to those guys that, feel like, okay, hey, I don't want to come across as self-promoting, or I don't want to, really, do a lot of the things that others do and it's viewed as career development? What kind of advice or guidance would you give those assistant coaches that are worried about that or thinking about that?
Everything starts in the mind. Everything. People don't like when I say this, but I believe it wholeheartedly. No one can pigeonhole you. Yeah. No, that's in my mind, that's a complete farce, right? Not that they can't try.
Yeah.
Right? But no one can do that. It's just like I tell my players, I cannot take away your confidence. I can try, but I can't because you have to believe in you. If you believe in you, you don't worry about me. If you work hard enough, you'll have confidence because you'll know the value of yourself. Just like a coach, a head coach can give an assistant coach a responsibility and say, this is what I expect you to do in this job, recruiting. I don't expect you to do anything else. But the only person that's responsible for the coach's development, well, I should say the first person, is the coach himself. So yes, take that responsibility. And if that's all he's asked you to do for that program, then do it to the best of your ability. Be the best recruiter in the country. But you also need to be watching film.
Yeah.
When you travel, when you're on an airplane, pull up some synergy, watch some clips, study the game, invest in player development, understand scouting reports. He can't stop you from doing that on your own time.
Right.
Is it important enough to you to invest in yourself?
The care factor.
Yeah. And then the next time you have an opportunity, maybe you work for somebody else who wants you to do something else. Well, now you're prepared to do that. You know the recruiting, you know it's important, but don't allow yourself to believe that someone is pigeonholing you. Only you can pigeonhole yourself. Somebody can give you responsibility, but you're responsible for your own career development. And it's not a self-promoting deal. It's just a pride in being the best you can be and being an all-around coach, somebody who has value to a program other than a relationship with an AU program or a particular kid, because that's short-lived.
Yep, no doubt, no doubt. When you think about your journey, and you think back to when you first started as a graduate manager, Furman 2004. You're coming in and you didn't quite come into it with that 10-year plan from before of when it's all said and done. When I'm done playing, I'm going to coach. So coming in somewhat blind. What are some things that you look back on and you say, man, if I only knew then what I know now, what would you bring to that table? And you alluded to it a little bit, being a grad manager and getting a different respect for those coaches. But how do you feel that role, and that role specifically, prepared you for the success that you've had in your career?
I think one of the things is you get a pretty good understanding as you go along in this business that there's always work to do. There's always ways as you develop for you to find a way to get better, right? And it's not just about recruiting and practice in games, right? I think the problem a lot of people have is first of all, they think that this is a business to get rich in. Very few people make a lot of money. I'm fortunate. I'm in a position where I make a decent amount of money to do this job, but I didn't until I got here in this position, right? Most people are, again, the regular guys, they're just living a day-to-day like everybody else. And you have to love what you're doing so that it doesn't feel like a drag, right? And then the other thing guys get in for is because of the prestige of being a coach and being on TV and coaching on ESPN or whatever it is. And there are very few programs who actually do that too, right? And so what you have to do is step back and say, what's this really about? And if you can embrace the core of the profession, which is developing young people, having great relationships, being around the game, giving back to it, right? We're stewards here. We're servant leaders in our positions. We're people who can have an impact on 18 to 22-year-old, for the most part, Black men, but even other races of men, and helping them become better people and preparing them for life. And if you don't approach it that way, you're going to be frustrated, because that's really the only thing that's across the board existent. You're going to be chasing something. You're going to be chasing a bigger check. You're going to be chasing a bigger job. You're going to be chasing more, whatever it is. And when you do that, it's like I tell my guys, when I started working, my first job, I made $40,000 at Coastal Carolina. I thought I was rich. I never had any money before. So, and then I made 50,000. And then all of a sudden, I started living like I was making $50,000, and 50,000 wasn't enough. Right. So I went in a short time from like feeling like, man, I got more money than I ever imagined, and I'm good, to worrying about the money. And as long as you worried about the money, there's always going to be more money that you need.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Last question I have for you, and you alluded to it a little bit earlier, about the goal of leaving Oklahoma State in a better place than you found it, and ultimately leaving the culture of Black coaches, leaving that in a better place than when you found it, and being that beacon of light and hope, and winning and giving that representation for the next generation. But when you think about the overall legacy, obviously your legacy as a man, showing your sons or your children in general, or the kids that you're coaching, or just anybody that knows you, showing them the success academically, right? Like, being that first generation college graduate, obviously you've changed and you've set the bar higher. When you're thinking about that legacy and the legacy of your life, when you're done coaching, like you said, whether it be, some tragedy or 40, 50 years down the line, how do you want Mike Boynton to be remembered and spoke about in rooms when you're not even there?
Well, I hope that when I'm talked about, that nobody talks about a game, even if it's a national championship.
Yeah.
I don't want that to be the first. I don't want that on my tombstone. Right? I don't want anything about the game of basketball, because being a coach isn't about the game of basketball. The game of basketball is a part of being a coach, but being a coach is about helping people. Being a coach is about mentoring. Being a coach is about relationships. Being a coach is about making sure that, again, Justin Brantley has somebody he can look to as a sound person that looks like him, that's found some level of success without compromising himself, right? And I want it to be about who I was as a father, who I am or was as a husband, and, in the community. I mean, some of my best relationships in the country are with guys who I never coached a game. They're with like managers of teams who they were like managers at Coastal Carolina or Furman. They were managers at Wofford. They're guys who were janitors. Like, one of my best friends is the guy who's the janitor at Stephen F. Austin. We still talk to this day, because to me, this is about people. Life is about people. And I think I go back right to the beginning. That was first reflected upon me when my little brother never came home from the hospital. Life is so precious, and we get caught up in so many things that don't matter. If you can invest in people, you have a pretty fulfilling life. And I hope that's something that people will always remember me about.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Coach, I appreciate you so much. I think that, like I said, I know myself, I picked up some gems from this. I learned some key and valuable things that I'm going to apply moving forward. And I know without a doubt, it's going to help and it's going to impact other lives. So I appreciate you taking the time. I always say, time is the most valuable asset any of us have. So, and as busy as your days are, for you to give me this much of your time, I appreciate it more than you know.
No problem, man. I appreciate you having me, and enjoy the rest of the weekend.
You too. We'll talk soon.
All right.